She taught me that everyone has the potential to give something back, that everyone indeed deserves a supporting hand in life.
In the monarchy, secrets are currency and silence is power, but every so often something slips through tradition and shakes the entire story forever. That's exactly what happened when Prince William uncovered his late mother, Princess Diana's final letter. Sealed away for decades, it carried words that no royal aide could ever control. Raw, personal, and too dangerous to stay hidden, the moment William chose to share them left the monarchy trembling, and Queen Camilla staring down the one fate she never thought possible, being cast out. It began quietly on a winter morning inside Kensington Palace. William was sifting through old boxes with a trusted archivist, finishing a task he had put off for years. Most of it was harmless. Photos, small mementos, state visit notes. But then, tucked in a faded leather journal once owned by his mother, came the shock that stopped him cold. An envelope, his name written across it in Diana's unmistakable handwriting. The ink had faded, but the curves of the letters pierced straight into his memory. He froze, thumb running along its edge, his chest tight. The archivist sensed the shift and quietly stepped back, leaving William alone. In the dim light of the study, he turned it over. The seal was untouched. On the back, in careful script, the words, "For William, when the time is right." His pulse raced. Memories of Diana rushed in, her laughter cutting through stiff palace formality, the way she always bent down to meet his eyes, her ability to sense what he felt before he spoke. But mixed with love came the sting. Why was this hidden? Who decided he wasn't ready? His hand trembled as he slid a finger under the seal. Inside, one sheet of stationery with the royal crest faint at the top. Her elegant handwriting swept across it. The very first line hit like a thunderbolt. "My darling William, if you are reading this, then I was right. The truth could not be kept from you forever." He stopped there, staring, afraid of what came next, as the winter light outside the palace crept slowly across the glass. Snow began to fall on the palace gardens, clinging to the bare branches like the world itself had frozen, holding its breath with him. William's eyes raced across the page, devouring every word. This wasn't just a mother's love letter. It was a warning, a confession, and at the center of it all, it pointed straight at Camilla. By the time he reached the end, his hands trembled. The final line was short, but sharp, cutting straight to his core. "When you stand as a man, remember this. Not everyone who smiles beside you wishes you well." The words echoed like thunder in his chest. Folding the letter back into its envelope, William sat in silence, knowing deep down that nothing, not his life, not the monarchy, would ever be the same again. That night, long after the palace halls had gone quiet, William sat alone in his private study. The fire snapped in the hearth, shadows stretching across the walls. On the desk before him lay the envelope, faintly scented with age, holding the voice of his mother within it. He had read it once, but now, in the dead stillness, he felt the pull to read it again, this time slowly, letting every word settle deep into his bones. He poured himself a glass of water, then sank into the leather chair by the window. The letter seemed heavier than paper should ever feel, as if his mother's very spirit had been pressed into its fibers. With unsteady hands, he unfolded it, smoothing the creases with care. His eyes met the opening line again, "My darling William." And in that moment, he swore he could almost hear her voice, calm, steady, the same warmth she gave him as a boy whenever the outside world felt too loud. The words on the page seemed to whisper from beyond. "If you are reading this, then my instincts were right. Life inside the palace is a stage, full of performers who never show the real script." And now, in Diana's own handwriting, William finally had hers. She poured out fears not for herself, but for her sons. Words about loyalty, trust, and how ambition can quietly poison both. Then came the part that made his pulse pound even harder. She wrote about Camilla. "I have tried to keep my heart open to those around me, but there are some whose presence carries shadows. You may one day be asked to accept her as family. If you do, tread carefully. Her charm is a mask, and beneath it lies a will as unyielding as stone. I have felt it press against me, and I fear you will too." The words hit like a hammer. William had spent years working to keep peace, holding bridges between his family and the crown. But now, in black ink on royal paper, was Diana's raw truth, and that truth cast a long, dark shadow over the woman who now wore the crown as queen. He read the last lines again, his throat tightening. When the time comes, you must decide not only what is best for the crown, but what is best for your heart. And remember, love is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet insistence to protect what cannot protect itself. William set the letter down, leaning back in his chair. Outside, the snowfall had ended, leaving the gardens white and still, a silence that made the weight of choice even heavier. His mother had written these warnings decades ago, yet they had landed in his hands now, at the exact moment when ignoring them was no longer possible. Somewhere deep inside, William knew he couldn't bury this letter back into the shadows. He couldn't keep it to himself, not anymore. The next morning, before dawn had even touched the palace walls, William woke earlier than usual. Sleep refused to come. Every sentence of his mother's handwriting replayed in his head with piercing clarity. The letter still sat on his desk, drawing him back like it had a life of its own. This time, William decided he couldn't just read it. He had to preserve it. He reached for a pen and began taking notes, not as a royal archivist would, but as a son desperate to make sure her voice could never be erased by fire, politics, or palace agendas. He underlined the first paragraph, the one where Diana called palace life a stage. He knew exactly what she meant. Years of engagements, public smiles, and carefully crafted warmth had taught him that gestures could be rehearsed, every grin calculated. But her words chilled him. She had seen the danger in the performance long before anyone else dared to admit it. Further down, she described the loneliness, a loneliness that haunted her even in crowded rooms. William paused there, memories flooding back. Diana walking alone through the Kensington Gardens, head bowed, hands stuffed in her coat pockets. The world adored her, yet she had been one of the loneliest souls he had ever known. Then came Camilla. Diana's tone wasn't cruel, but it was sharp with caution, heavy enough to settle into William's bones. Her charm is never without purpose. Her influence can bend even the strongest intentions. I hope I'm wrong, she wrote, but I fear one day she will have the ear of those who shape your path. If that day comes, listen twice as hard to your own heart. These weren't just words about Camilla the person, they were words about power itself. A warning that influence inside the palace could twist personal choices into matters of state. Diana had known the monarchy wasn't built only on duty, but on perception, and she feared the wrong hand whispering in the dark could scar both crown and family forever. Near the end of the letter, Diana's tone shifted. It softened, almost tender, as she spoke of his duty as a brother. She urged him to protect Harry, to make sure neither of them would be swallowed whole by the institution. The crown may rest on one head, she wrote, but its weight is shared by those who love you. Those words stirred something deep in William, a reminder that beyond the titles and the rituals, family was all that truly mattered. Then came the final paragraph, the one that froze him in place. If you ever feel that truth is being buried, remember that sunlight will always find its way in. And if you must be the one to open the shutters, do it with courage, for the world will not thank you until long after you are gone. He leaned forward, elbows pressed to the desk. This was no longer just a private letter from a mother to her son. It read like a manifesto, a call to action, a mirror held up to every doubt he had tried to bury over the years. And now he knew. Reading it in secret was not enough. Her words had to be heard, not whispered, not leaked, but spoken in his own voice, with the conviction she had placed in him. It would mean breaking the palace's unspoken rules. It would mean risking the fragile unity he had fought so hard to preserve. But Diana's message was clear. Truth was worth the cost, no matter the fallout. And so came the hardest choice of all, confrontation. William slipped the letter into his inner jacket pocket, folded carefully so no crease would mar it. All day, the paper pressed against his chest like a heartbeat, reminding him of the burden he now carried. This was no longer just a relic from his mother. It was a truth too powerful to ignore. William chose Clarence House for the confrontation, knowing its quieter halls would keep the moment away from Buckingham's constant noise. He arrived without ceremony, stepping out of the car in a dark overcoat, his jaw set hard. A few aides greeted him with stiff bows, but the bluntness of his request to see the king sent whispers racing down the corridors. Within minutes, William was ushered into Charles's private study. The king sat behind his desk, leafing through a stack of state papers. He looked up, surprised, even pleased, to see his eldest son. But the warmth faded as soon as he caught the gravity etched into William's face. "What brings you here unannounced?" Charles asked, voice measured. William closed the door himself, the click echoing like a warning. "I need to speak with you. Alone." Charles gave a small wave, dismissing the aides. The room fell still, father and son left in the muted glow of the lamps. Without a word, William reached into his coat and placed the envelope on the desk. The king's eyes dropped instantly to the handwriting on the front. For a moment, his hand froze above it, his features tightening as if he already knew what ghost had returned to haunt him. "Where did you get this?" Charles asked quietly, almost strained. William's reply came steady, unshaken. "It was in one of Mother's journals. It was meant for me, and I've read it." The silence hung thick in the room until Charles finally broke it, his voice carefully measured. "And what did it say?" William didn't flinch. He locked eyes with his father. It said enough about her life here, about what she saw, about what she feared. His tone hardened. "And about Camilla." Charles's expression darkened, though he kept his composure. "Your mother had strong feelings. You know as well as I do. The past is complicated." "It's not the past I'm talking about," William snapped back. "It's the present, the very influence she warned me about. It's here, right now." The air grew colder, or maybe it was just the silence closing in. Charles leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. "William, the crown is not strengthened by reopening old wounds. Whatever your mother wrote, it was a different time, under different circumstances." William shook his head firmly. "No, she wrote it for this time. She knew it would matter when the stakes were highest, and I will not bury it." Before Charles could answer, the door opened without a knock. Camilla entered, a file in hand, clearly expecting nothing more than a routine meeting. She froze when her eyes landed on the envelope sitting on the desk. Her gaze flicked from the letter to William's face, and finally to Charles. "What's going on here?" she asked, her tone sharp. Neither man answered, but the weight in the room had already shifted. All three of them knew that whatever happened next, the secret was no longer contained. By the next morning, the unthinkable happened. The letter had leaked. The palace, once carefully controlled, was in chaos. William had left Clarence House with the letter still in his pocket, but the tension from that night clung to every corridor like a ghost that refused to leave. Servants whispered in hushed tones. Aides avoided his eyes. The palace felt tense, as if the walls themselves knew a dangerous truth had slipped free. The leak began small. A single post on a niche forum for royal watchers. The anonymous user claimed to have overheard aides discussing a hidden letter from Diana that named Camilla. Normally, it would have been dismissed, until they added, "William found it. Tension is already brewing inside Clarence House." Within hours, screenshots spread across social media. A gossip blogger jumped first with the headline, "A letter from the grave. Diana's final words shake the palace." By midday, 2 sources confirmed the discovery, and the press storm erupted. The palace press office scrambled to contain it, but hashtags like Diana's letter and what she said were already trending worldwide. The silence only fueled the speculation. Behind closed doors, William was furious. Not because the letter was public, he had thought of releasing it himself, but because half-truths were now twisting his mother's voice into rumours she had never written. William's mother had never written the lines now being twisted into lurid headlines, and that distortion cut deep. Camilla, meanwhile, was furious. She called her senior staff into an emergency meeting, her voice sharp, her tone icy. "This is an intrusion into private family matters," she snapped. But beneath the polished anger, unease flickered. She knew that if even fragments of Diana's warning reached the public, no PR strategy could save her reputation. By evening, the BBC and The Guardian were both reporting indirect excerpts from the letter. None could print the full text, but one line spread like wildfire. "Not everyone who smiles beside you wishes you well." For millions, the implication was crystal clear. By nightfall, the story had blown wide open. What began as a son's private moment with his late mother had now become a public reckoning, and pressure on William to break his silence mounted by the hour. The following days felt like siege warfare. Every time William appeared in public, microphones lunged toward him with the same questions in different forms. Is the letter real? Does it mention Queen Camilla? Will you release it? William gave nothing back, only polite nods or the faintest smile. But the silence didn't kill the frenzy. It fed it. Inside Kensington Palace, the atmosphere was just as strained. Advisors urged restraint, warning that any word from him would escalate the crisis beyond repair. Catherine, steady as ever, reminded him of his mother's words. Sunlight will always find its way in. Those words had echoed in William's mind since the moment he first read them. The turning point came during a late-night call with one of his closest friends, someone outside the royal bubble who had known Diana personally. William read a portion of the letter aloud. When he finished, silence hung on the line, until his friend finally said, "If she trusted you to have those words when the time was right, then maybe this is the time." That stayed with him. By morning, his mind was set. He wouldn't let the tabloids twist her words. He would read the letter himself, not as a slip to a reporter, not as a watered-down palace statement, but in his own voice. The truth, exactly as Diana had written it. The perfect stage appeared almost too neatly. A charity gala was already scheduled for the next week, supporting mental health initiatives, a cause Diana had championed long before it became a fashionable royal talking point. William was set to give the keynote speech, and it would be broadcast live. He realised instantly this was the moment. When he told the palace communications team, they pushed back hard. They warned that reading the letter would be viewed as a direct strike at the Queen, and a blow to the monarchy's fragile stability. William listened, but he didn't bend. For him, this wasn't about tearing down the crown. It was about honouring his mother, and giving the public answers unfiltered, unspun, undeniable. In the days before the gala, he kept the letter close, folded carefully in his jacket pocket. At night, in the quiet of his study, he practiced reading it aloud. He hadn't practiced to memorize the words, only to hear how they sounded when spoken. Each time, grief, pride, and resolve gripped him the same way. By the morning of the gala, his decision was final. He knew it could forever change his bond with his father and with Camilla. That evening, as he straightened his tie, he could almost hear Diana's voice. "Do it with courage." With the letter tucked inside his jacket, William stepped out ready to change the monarchy with a few words that could never be taken back. The ballroom glowed under golden chandeliers, tables draped in white, guests murmuring with ease. Cameras lined the back, ready to beam the speeches across the nation. William entered with Catherine at his side, her emerald gown shimmering as she held his arm. Only she knew the weight he carried in his pocket. The night moved smoothly with speeches and awards, light and celebratory. But when the host finally announced William, the applause rose with an edge of anticipation. William stepped to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and let his gaze sweep the room. His grip on the lectern betrayed a flicker of nerves, but his voice came steady as he opened with the usual formalities, thanking the hosts, praising the cause. Then, with a pause, he reached into his jacket. He pulled out a single folded sheet, the royal crest faint at the top. "I want to share something personal," he said, his tone deepening. "Something written many years ago by my mother, Princess Diana. She addressed it to me, but I believe its message belongs to many." The room froze. Forks stopped mid-air. Conversations died. Even the cameras seemed to lean closer. William smoothed the letter on the podium and began. "My darling William, if you are reading this, then my instincts were right. The truth could not be kept from you forever." The words fell heavy, cutting through the golden air of the ballroom. Sentence by sentence, he painted his mother's fears, of loyalty, of hidden agendas, of smiles that concealed shadows. When he read her warning about palace life as a stage, some guests shifted uneasily. Still, he pressed on, his tone unflinching. Finally, he reached her closing words. "If you ever feel that truth is being buried, remember that sunlight will always find its way in. Do it with courage." The room stayed utterly still. William folded the letter, laying it on the podium. For a breath, there was nothing. No applause, no movement, just the sound of him exhaling. Then, from the back, a single pair of hands began to clap. Another joined, then another, until the ballroom erupted. But this wasn't the polite clapping of a royal gala. It was raw, unrestrained, a standing ovation that seemed to say everyone in the room knew they had just witnessed something far beyond protocol. In the front row, Catherine's eyes glistened. Across the hall, some faces were stiff, unsettled, and though Camilla wasn't there, everyone knew the words had already reached her. Within the hour, William understood the applause would fade, but the silence that followed, in the palace, in the press, behind locked doors, would roar far louder. By dawn, his speech was the only story in Britain. Clips of William reading Diana's words looped endlessly on every news network, dissected by commentators, shared millions of times online. Front pages blared their verdicts. The Times called it a son's tribute, a kingdom's reckoning. The Guardian named it the speech that redefined royal silence, and the Daily Mail went for the jugular. William reads Diana's warning. Is the Queen next? Public reaction was fierce. Across the country, people said it felt as if Diana's voice had returned. Those who lived through her era felt the sting of her loss all over again. Younger generations, who had only seen her in photographs and documentaries, said they finally understood why her name still burned with power. William's decision to read the letter was nothing short of revolutionary. Within hours, petitions flooded the internet, demanding palace transparency and questioning Queen Camilla's very place in the royal order. Hashtags like #StandWithWilliam and #Diana's spread like wildfire, often paired with clips of Diana's old interviews and footage of her charity work. Outside Kensington Palace, the gates filled with flowers once again, just as they had after Diana's death. Notes tucked among the bouquets read, "We heard you, William," and "Diana's truth will not be buried inside the palace." The mood was electric, combustible, and impossible to ignore. Inside, aides scrambled to measure the damage. The communications team debated a statement, but feared any response might fan the flames. Camilla, however, wasn't nearly so cautious. Those close to her said she felt blindsided, humiliated, enraged that the speech hadn't been discussed with her or her staff beforehand. Behind closed doors, her frustration spilled out. "He has drawn a line in the sand, and he expects me to stand on the wrong side of it." The king now faced an impossible dilemma. Publicly defending Camilla risked alienating his people and his son. Staying silent made him look complicit in the very warning Diana had written decades ago. Advisors urged him to push William into releasing a joint statement to soften the blow, but William refused outright. "The letter speaks for itself," he told them. "I will not dilute her words." And as the days passed, the pressure only mounted. A respected royal historian went live on television. A royal historian declared it might be remembered as a turning point in monarchy itself. "This isn't about a building, a title, or even an individual," she said. "It's about whether the institution can finally confront its own truths." Camilla's response was to vanish. Public appearances were suddenly postponed, with aides citing a need to avoid distraction. But her absence only deepened the storm. Crowds still gathered where she was scheduled to appear, holding placards with Diana's face and waving printouts of the letter's words. The monarchy was under siege, not from scandal in the usual sense, but from the moral force of a mother's voice carried into the present by her son. Across Britain, the question grew louder. How long could Camilla remain when the public's hearts were clearly turning against her? Her departure came on a grey Tuesday morning, the sky low and heavy over London. Few inside the palace expected resolution so soon, but the pressure had become unbearable. For weeks, Camilla had been absent, her duties quietly reassigned, her movements tracked obsessively by tabloids speculating on her health, her marriage, and most of all her crumbling place within the royal family. The final blow came in the form of an opinion poll, the sharpest in decades. For the first time since her marriage to the king, more than half the nation declared she should step aside completely. "Britain speaks. Camilla must go," the headline echoed through the palace. This was no passing storm. It was a reckoning. Behind closed doors, the king met with advisors, then with William, and finally with Camilla. The exchange was calm but final. Charles spoke of unity, of shielding the monarchy from fracture. Camilla listened, face unreadable, before saying flatly, "You're asking me to step aside." Charles hesitated, then nodded. "I'm asking you to do what's best for the institution." She rose, slowly. "The institution," she repeated, as if tasting the word. No anger, only cold acceptance. She left without another word, her heels fading down the carpeted hall. That afternoon, the palace released its statement. Queen Camilla would step back from public duties indefinitely to focus on personal matters and supporting His Majesty in private. No mention of the letter, no mention of William's speech, but everyone knew. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered with photos of Diana. Some wept, Others stood in silence. Online, tributes to William poured in, hailing his courage and Diana's enduring influence. That night, alone in his study, William unfolded the letter once more. He read it slowly, then placed it in a protective case. The letter would remain, not hidden, but preserved, a reminder of the woman who shaped him and the choice to honor her voice above all else. For William, this wasn't a triumph, but a turning point. The monarchy itself had shifted, perhaps forever, by a mother's words reaching her son. Even as the palace grew quiet, Diana's voice echoed on. It wasn't decrees or palace strategy that shook the crown. It was a letter read aloud by a man who finally chose courage over caution. William hadn't sought applause. He simply refused to let the truth be buried. And when Diana's words were finally heard, the crown had no choice but to listen. Between duty and love, William chose both, and the people followed. Legacy, he realized, isn't marble or gold. It's love protecting what cannot protect itself. In that promise, Diana's voice still guides a future king and reshapes the family she left behind. If you made it this far, sound off in the comments. Should William have spoken out or stayed silent? Make sure to like, share, and subscribe if you want more deep dives like this.